This journey can be quite lonely unless you have a really great founder network already, which typically is not the case when you're just jumping off from corporate to startup. And just having a mentor on that journey is really key. Hey guys, so happy to be with you. Welcome. We are going to talk about 4 biggest mistakes that founders make as they plan their leap or as they're making that important transition from corporate to entrepreneurship. And I am excited to dive in. But before I do, I wanted to introduce myself. I transitioned from a corporate career to entrepreneurship, having been a management consultant at Boston Consulting Group and then climbing the corporate ladder at Dell. I started a company called ClassTag that I led to 5 million parents and teachers, uniting them in student success through a communication platform and 8-figure exit. I'm excited now as part of Elevator Lab to coach and mentor and be on the journey with entrepreneurs to help them get from idea to exit and help them scale their startups with confidence and without borders. And this is the webinar that I wished I had when I was starting my transition, because there are so many things that are different about being a startup founder, especially if you're used to your salary coming in every month, if you're used to bigger companies, bigger a network of vendors, access to talent, right? So there is a lot of things that you've gathered as a founder that will really serve you well. And there are a number of things that, of course, you would also need to unlearn and prepare for to be successful in this journey. So on to the deadly mistakes. Mistake number 1 is not properly planning your runway. Like startup, you as a person have a runway. And for those of us who were used to high paying corporate jobs, your life would be different for a fairly long period of time as a founder. Even when you are successful, when you can exit the business, when you raise the funding, if that's your path, it will look different for the months and years in the beginning. And so you have to really prepare for that. And what that means is thinking about personal runway, right? Thinking about 12 to 18 months of funding for the company and for you personally to maintain the standard of life that you are able to maintain for a prolonged period of time, right? Those of us who have families, especially, it's really important to plan for that, because guess what happens to a lot of folks before they come to Elevator and we start working with them is that they are eager to make the leap. They're eager to make the jump into entrepreneurship because they're so passionate about their idea. But of course, what happens is if you don't plan properly for your finances, you just run out of personal runway before your company and your idea can see the light of day. And in fact, that was what I wanted to do when I finally decided this was the idea I wanted to pursue in communication space. And my mentor saved me at the time, because you really need to think about what your corporate salary can buy you. And in my case, it could buy me 3 amazing people in other locations outside of United States, leveraging Upwork, leveraging Fiverr, various contracting platforms. And so they effectively created a lot of capacity while allowing me to live in New York City and be a contributor to the family budget that I needed to be. And so that's really key to plan carefully for that personal runway. So that's mistake number 1. And on to mistake number 2. Mistake number 2 is keeping your startup a secret. Those of us coming from corporate world know there are NDAs, the ideas are not shared, right? And just allocate, frankly, in the early days, too much value to the idea itself. What happens, of course, we know rationally, is brilliant idea not executed is worth nothing. A great idea, well executed, is worth something, right? So it is so critical to talk to everyone you can find about your idea. You never know who can be helpful. And if you are thinking about signing NDA before sharing your amazing idea, just stop it right now. People in startup world don't really go around with NDAs unless it's a really revolutionary discovery that they've made. Most ideas are in the air, and even if you don't know it, there are five other people who are thinking about the same thing you are thinking, and maybe already started building it or starting to build it. And that's just the reality. What it comes down to, really, your unique view and deep understanding of customer problem, and execution, head down execution, and out executing everyone that you are competing with. So talk to everyone. And a quick story on this for me was, as I'm a not technical, my expertise is strategy, sales, business development, and so I needed a technical co-founder. And so I went to dozens of meetups trying to meet someone. I wasn't meeting anyone that I was so excited about, and I wouldn't settle for less. But I continued to talk to everyone I could find. I was talking to my preschool parents that were at the time at the same school. And as the luck had it, one mom introduced me to her husband, who became my co-founder and just amazing serial entrepreneur and technologist, and really wanted to. Um, we had a shared vision, shared values, and it was just an amazing, amazing partnership. So, have I not had that conversation and talked to everyone I could find about the idea? Certainly would have been much more difficult to find that co-founder. So that's mistake number two. Your startup idea might be great, but it's not a top secret. So talk to everyone freely and ask for referrals. Ask for who they know, who is relevant. If you're looking for co-founder, if you're looking for partners, if you're looking for other folks, but it has to be shared in order for people to actually contribute and take an interest in what you're doing. So that's mistake number two. Moving on to mistake number three. Again, it's related to those folks who are not technical. And of course, if you're starting a technical company, you need someone to actually develop the software. And so that's the step where a lot of folks get paralyzed because they can't really launch anything, right? They can't build an MVP, minimal viable product, without having someone technical on their side. And so rather than being paralyzed in the early days, it's okay to get a company, a firm to develop it, or individual contributors that you can find again on various contracting platforms. The challenge, of course, is as folks in corporate, they get spoiled because we deal with large companies, and we know these large companies have reputation. So they pay their bills, they deliver on time, they do all sorts of things. And when you deal with smaller companies, you have to be very, very vigilant because you don't know what's going to happen once you pay them, especially if you pay for the whole work up front. They can just disappear. And in fact, that's what happened to me. And now, as I work with early stage founders making the transition, I certainly advise them to review the contracts very carefully, and we'll look at selecting the partners that really partners in the structure of the partnership that would avoid those mistakes. In my case, in the early days before had my co-founder, I didn't want to settle for someone that I was not 300% excited about, which 100% was the right choice. I did move forward with a contracting company, which was based in New York, outsourcing elsewhere the development work. And what happened a month in is that they went bust. And so all the money I paid them upfront to build the MVP, and the MVP never happened. And so that was exactly the time when my co-founder helped out and stepped in to actually build it. But again, I was moving ahead, right? The other thing that I think is a lesson learned related to this mistake, right, is not only being careful as to who you use for your development work, but it also is the train has to be moving. People want to be part, your co-founders, your investors, your early employees. They want to see that you are an unstoppable force, and they want to see that you're going to move forward no matter what. And that's the level of passion that attracts everyone around you to jump on your train, right? People don't help people necessarily who need help, right? Or give money to those who need money. They give money and help and their time to those who they can grow with, who just are infectious with their passion about what they're doing, what they're building. So that's on number 3. So be careful who you contract your early development with. And mistake number 4 is really key, especially if you're in that transition. This is the first business you're starting as a corporate, going into startup land. Um, you have to think carefully about not only who you serve, and that's not first step number 1. Right? Step number 1 is to serve the people you're passionate about serving for a really long time, because startups are a long game, right? It takes 8 years, 6 years, a decade sometimes, or, if the company is successful, you would go on for 20, 30 years, who knows, right? You have to be prepared to serve the people that you choose to serve for a really long time without losing that drive and passion for them. And so that's really key. Second step is, of course, validation. And that validation, here's the catch, that validation needs to happen with money and commitment involved, right? Where I think folks that I see that come to Elevator Get Tripped Up is they say, hey, I've interviewed 100 people. They really want to get my software, but they don't end up paying for it, right? And so at the end of the day, if you're building something, you have to think of the easiest and fastest way to test how they would be paying. Because you might be going after a problem that, yes, is important, yes, is unresolved, uh, but there is no money involved, right? There is no budget if you're in B2B, or the problem is just not important enough, or there is no existing behavior of paying for that to solve that problem, right? And so that becomes really, really challenging business, right? Because at the end of the day, we are not building this cool startup. We're building a real business that has to have real unit economics and ultimately profitability um, in the future, especially in the financial climate we're in. As a first-time founder, raising that pre-seed money is very, very challenging unless you have a network of kind of family and friends to support you. The idea that you have to go to early pre-seed investors that have never met you before, that don't where you don't have sort of traction to really show them the proof is in the pudding, right? The proof is there that you have demand for your product. It's really, really hard to raise funding, and that's why validating business is so critical. Even though you might start with one feature of your whole product, right? You have to slow it down, but that level of commitment has to be there. And of course, the best source of funding is your customers. So follow the money as you think about those people you're passionate about serving, and then really solving the problems that people are willing to pay to solve. So that's a mistake number 4. We're building a business, not a startup. And so with that, I wanted to summarize 4 mistakes we talked about. So first one is don't cut off the lifeline. right? Think of your personal runway, at least 12 to 18 months, both funding the business and funding your lifestyle that you can maintain in the long term. Two is don't keep your startup a top secret. Talk to everyone you can find. And that's how you get those valuable connections for co-founders, investors, other people who would be really helpful and important in your journey. So I dropped an NDA right now. Number three is make progress no matter what, right? People want to jump on a train that's moving, not the one that's standing and waiting for help to. And number four is build a business, not a startup. That's why it's so critical to really validate that monetization early on. And now on to questions, and I will invite Eva to come on and join me right here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, good morning.
Welcome, Eva. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, hi, I'm Eva. I spent the last 12 years at tech startups in various growth roles in the UK and the US, and including last 7 years with Vlada at ClassTag, and now after exit continuing to support entrepreneurs at Elevator Lab.
Amazing. Super. And folks are really blessed to have Eva as part of Elevator because she has been through the trenches to build multiple revenue lines and really can dial in their go-to-market, their monetization in magical ways. And so, Eva, in terms of questions, what do you see come up?
So I have one question for you. Obviously, as you prepared yourself for diving into entrepreneurship, I'm sure you expose yourself to the tech scene and startup scene. And I know you're a diligent and curious person. So I'm sure you learned as much as you could before really diving in. So what do you think was still the biggest shock and the biggest surprise when actually doing it versus what you expected?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say I thought that my corporate career and my MBA prepared me really well to be a startup founder because I had pretty good understanding of marketing and finance and accounting and, where sales and various things, right? A strategy, right? Various things that sort of are the core functions. And I said, well, how difficult can it be to figure out a startup? Just do these things and that works. But I was so far from, that was so far from truth, meaning that just knowing the theory and doing it in the trenches is very different. So as a founder, I think what really surprised me was how agile you have to be, right? So one hour you're doing customer support because you haven't hired anyone and you're just scrappy and just getting started. Next hour, you need to think about your PR outreach because you have this new release coming and you're trying to get in the news and kind of get your, foot there. And so you just have to wear so many hats, but in a very tangible way that you just haven't really done or cannot be taught. And related to that, and I think why I'm so passionate about Elevator is I did join mentorship program that really was practical and was really the real MBA that I needed to be a successful founder, as opposed to something that's kind of broad strokes theoretical. And so I remember joining it and joking, hey, I have an MBA. What can you teach me? But it was so far from the truth.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And that reminds me also of some situations we had when working together, when we would bring in senior people. I think we talked about this before, bringing in senior people from big name companies and seeing how they are very used to relying on other team members.
Yeah, exactly. That don't have that level of scrappiness.
Exactly. And I think that's the same with executives diving into entrepreneurships. I think that could be a surprise how practical and versatile you need to become.
Right, absolutely. And I think one thing, I don't want to devalue the massive experience you have. And that experience gonna, first of all, if you're doing something that's relevant to your role and the key insight that you gleaned from being in that function or that role, uh, that is already a big asset, of course, because you have that kind of unique perspective as someone who experienced the problem, or maybe you serve the people who are experiencing the problem. But that executive sort of presence, org charts, organizational dynamics, annual planning, like all of those things going to come in really, really handy, but not on day one. Right. And so that's where I think that first year is the kind of the toughest transition, because you really need to unlearn a lot of those things that, yes, they will come in so handy and you will become the best CEO because you've had that background. You've learned sort of those structures and those skills, but you just don't have people to apply them to on day one. And so you have to learn to be really scrappy and get it done all on your own. And of course, if you work with Elevator, you don't have to get it done all on your own. You have someone to hold your hand. And I think that's the other piece, is that this journey can be quite lonely unless you have a really great founder network already, which typically is not the case when you're just jumping off from corporate to startup. And just having a mentor on that journey is really key. There are certainly various ways to do it. There are accelerator programs where you give a chunk of equity and you go into that in a more kind of very structured way. That's something we decided not to pursue at ClassTag, because we really had families, we had kind of different life at the time, and so that's why that mentorship program, which is what we're doing at Elevator, I think is such a great fit for a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question I would ask is more around mindset. Obviously, there are a lot of emotional issues we may be dealing with considering this step. But I wonder, what do you think about reasonable timeline for validating the idea, and how to give yourself enough space, but not too much space to become sort of endlessly paralyzed by fear and wanting to improve and test?
Yeah, that's not $1 million question. That's $1 billion question. And I think there is no single answer to that. I think it's a combination of factors. What I do know is that unless you have that product market fit and you know that people really stick with your product, they love your product, they want to share your product, you cannot build a software business. And so I think how long you're willing to wait to get to that stage, that, depends on the personal circumstances and sort of your mindset and mental sort of runway, not only financial, but also mental runway that you have. But I think the big mistake that I'm seeing folks do is their pivots are too small, right? So effectively what they're trying to do is finding a local maximum as opposed to finding a global one, right? And so they have an idea and you see that, your tests are showing that it's not working, you have to try bigger leaps. And the truth might be somewhere in the middle, but unless you leap big enough, right? Look at some leaps are crazy, right? From Slack, that started as a gaming company and then moved to communication, right? Some pivots are completely different industries, but the main point is typically the mission doesn't fundamentally need to change, right? And even but the persona can change, or the budget you're aligned to can change, or exactly the angle to solve a problem, right? But you have to really be willing to be flexible and not be, as we often talk about, Eva, not be a solution looking for a problem, right? You really have to, and that's why I think that early time in your ideation is so critical, because once you have your solution, once you build your MVP, that becomes so hard to part with it. And that really hurts you, because you are no longer objective in your judgment. And again, you have to maintain a scientist mindset and really test. And prove or disprove hypothesis and not think of it as failure, right? There is no failure in startup. Success rates are really low because it is a tough game. And that's why you have to experiment. And that speed and that skill of experimentation is what's going to propel you to really grow.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And I think at that stage, it's also really important in that context who you surround yourself with, and being surrounded by people that can be a little bit more risk tolerant and bold and have bold vision to encourage you to do that, right?
Absolutely. So, folks, I think it's a wrap for us. Thank you all for joining. Again, you can check us out at elevatorlab.com with an 8. And I look forward to talking to you all. Thank you, Eva, and thank you guys for tuning in.